Thanks for joining us. So looking at fraud in clinical research, of course, this is a high-level overview. Elizabeth, this is actually condensed down from a 3-day course. What we're looking for is what are some current examples of fraud in clinical research? Certainly you guys know what's going on out there as well. We'll look at regulatory focus and congressional bodies and their findings going back several years, but how it's really set the landscape for what we are doing now when we are out there. Unfortunately, even though that quote-unquote fraud, and we'll talk about that, is not something we see all the time, right? There are always issues that arise and that could potentially be the end of that thread, so to speak. What we do note is that, and we'll get to this, we do note that people are not always looking for it. And I always tell folks that if you don't appreciate that it can happen, then you're not going to really appreciate it when you see it or when you come across it. So we're going to look at some of the roles and challenges in how we detect and deter that misconduct or fraudulent activity. As we'll get to that too, I'm a firm believer that we cannot prevent fraud, which is disheartening from a compliance perspective, but we can certainly set up internal controls to deter it. We'll look at the impact and consequences of fraud in clinical research. Historically, some of the landmark cases, of course, and looking at some of the best practices that we've seen. We've had some recent NIDPO letters that have gone out that address some of these findings. And as you know, people are going to act upon that opportunity to misbehave. And how they come about doing that is always interesting when we go out and look for these things. So we're going to look at some definitions and elements of fraud. Again, defining generally noncompliance as the failure or refusal to comply. So we're looking at how one adapts to conform to the expectations. And one of the things that we find, and really bring it back to what we see in clinical research, is that oftentimes people are involved in clinical research without really truly understanding what those expectations are. In my opinion, we often go out and have sponsors select sites or CROs select sites and investigators where we're looking at medical licensure, we're looking at affiliation, or maybe even some marketing power behind what we're doing, and not always really latching on to that regulatory requirement for selecting a qualified investigator. We might be looking for that patient population and many different iterations of why we're selecting those sites, and not always giving them the foundation. Certainly, when we look at these NIDPO letters, we'll be talking about misconduct occurring at the clinical investigator site, but this doesn't occur in a vacuum. And we know that it's not the only investigators who are involved in this misconduct. It happens across the spectrum. So we're looking at noncompliance in terms of the behavior that is not conforming to our prevailing standards, which we've established from a regulatory perspective, from our internal SOPs, training, protocols, et cetera, and good clinical practice as a whole. So fraud is defined from a legal definition as an intentional perversion of the truth for the purpose of inducing another in reliance upon it to part with something that's valuable or to surrender a legal right. It is that false representation of a matter of fact. And if you really look at the dynamic in clinical research, where we're all involved and we have that system of mutual accountability and shared responsibility between regulatory authorities and our investigators, our sponsors and CROs and our IRBs. The regulations are structured really to support those latter few, but the expectation is that we're aware and we're mindful, and we have uniformity in our assessment of what should be happening to meet those regulatory obligations. When you think about regulations, it is a matter of responsibility and right. So we have a responsibility to uphold those regulatory requirements. I always tell investigators that research is a privilege, it's not a right. And if you are going to be involved, here are the rules that you need to follow. We're not here to tell you how to practice medicine, but we are telling you what the expectations are if you're involved in clinical research. So we all have something to gain, we all have something to lose, and we all have responsibilities. And a right is something that is due someone by law. So the same as a sponsor has a right to good data from a clinical investigator, the investigator has a right to a qualified monitor coming to the site. And it's oftentimes where these dynamics are misaligned, so to speak, that we find these issues arise. So we are giving up something when we have this misconduct. Each of us. We all have that duty